if you're adequately accessing and protecting the space of the lover, and that's one of the things I want to really emphasize a lot to you, the necessity to protect the garden. If you really protect the garden and protect the lover aspect of the psyche so that it is not constantly under attack without any kind of cover in your life, if you form that kind of space and you protect it adequately and you ritualize it adequately, then what happens? Well, the king energy in a man transforms. No longer is that power of the king energy and the commitment to leadership obsessed with domination of others.
In this lecture about the lover archetype and its influence on the psyche within masculine psychology, Dr. Robert Moore sheds light on how a man can heal his wounds within the lover archetype. He stresses the necessity for men to create space for lover energy in their lives to avoid its potential pitfalls, advocating for the transformative power of poetry and active imagination in personal development. Join us as Dr. Robert Moore goes deep into the structures of masculine psychology, revealing the positive and negative sides of the lover within each and every man.
I said to you last week that what I've been trying to do is to get more and more clear in my work for the last 15 years about the way in which these four different configurations, I like to think of them as circuits or programs in the psyche, have to be related to get us much more clear about what they are for, what they are to resource, what is a specific task in the psyche, and what does this contribute toward wholeness. You need to think about these things as bringing a gift to the total psyche. Each of these configurations, king, warrior, magician, lover, brings its own gift to the larger psyche. And if you receive all of the gifts of these configurations, then you have a shot at individuation and wholeness. If you refuse the gifts of any of the aspects of these configurations, then you really don't just lose out on the particular configuration you're refusing. What happens is that that very refusal distorts all of the energies of the other configurations. And I said to you last week that in discussions with Douglas Gillette, that's working with me on trying to get all this material in print, we were trying to think of images, and it hit me in the course of our discussion that probably the most adequate way to image this in terms of a concrete image is that of a pyramid-shaped structure, or the archetypal self itself is, say, two pyramids base to base, one representing the feminine, one representing the masculine. And that if you just think about the masculine psyche, that think what would happen if you had a pyramid and you build two sides of it or three sides of it, and try to imagine that in your mind. Imagine leaving a side off of it. What does this do to the rest of the structure? You get a feeling, if you start playing with images like that, you can get a feeling for the weakening of the other structures and the eventual distortion of the other aspects of the psyche if you do not pay attention to all of these configurations. And I want to just review a bit with you before we go. Last week we were talking almost totally about distortions. Tonight I want to emphasize to you again the necessity of this lover energy if you are going to fully develop, be a fully developed masculine personality. So let me just jump into that. Then we will start talking about resources. How do you get at this? And I'll be talking a good deal about active imagination along these lines and some other resources. But last week we talked about the way in which the king archetype, without this lover energy, functions in terms of tends to get erotic about domination. That is, if the lover space and energy has to come in the back door, then you will get off on domination of others. If you neglect the lover space directly, you don't develop that consciously, the warrior will really get into destruction of life. And there will be a sort of an erotic pleasure in devastation and destroying value, destroying whatever is in your field of fire. If you are coming out of the magician without adequate connection directly, appropriately to the lover, you will tend to be very detached emotionally, and you will be very voyeuristic, and you will not be able to think adequately about the moral and human meaning of things you invent. In other words, you will be a scientist without a heart. You will be a physicist who never thinks about the moral implications of your discoveries in high energy physics, etc. I mean, you can apply this to all the different scientific disciplines. Just another example of that. You know, in Madison, the people that use the most insight from archetypal psychology today and history of religions, comparative mythology, are not your schools of religion. They are not your theological seminary. They are not even your graduate schools of psychology. The people who are putting the most money and time into this type of thing today are people in advertising and marketing. They are buying magicians right and left to help them use archetypal images and the understanding about the power of images to manipulate people through marketing. I mean, all you have to do is look at commercials today and get a feeling for that. It's brilliant. I mean, spend an evening looking just at commercials. Forget the programs. Just look at the commercials and then go to a church the following weekend and see who you think is using the archetypal imagery most subtly, most capably. See? So that's this magician business without any sense of public responsibility. And then we talked about the difficulties that an individual who tends to mainline love energy has. We talked about the addictions and so forth. Problems with boundaries, problems with adequate ritualization, attempts to try to contain this energy when it's in very raw forms. And tonight, we just need to look at the other side of that so you can get clear in your mind the necessity for this lover energy and how we leave this out or we repress it to the human race's detriment. So let's go through it. If you're adequately accessing and protecting the space of the lover, and that's one of the things I want to really emphasize a lot to you, the necessity to protect the garden. You just think about a garden space. If you really protect the garden, and protect the lover aspect of the psyche so that it is not constantly under attack without any kind of cover in your life. If you form that kind of space and you protect it adequately and you ritualize it adequately, then what happens? Well, the king energy in a man transforms. No longer is that power of the king energy and the commitment to leadership obsessed with domination of others. What happens is what Erik Erikson, the great Freudian analyst, talked about as generativity comes online. If you have not read Erik Erikson's work, let me suggest that you begin with an overview that a really outstanding person, Robert Coles, a Harvard psychiatrist, has written about Erikson. It's just entitled Erik Erikson, The Growth of His Work. It's a sensitive summary of Erikson's work. And then that will get you into Erik Erikson's work. But the other book that I would recommend that you look at would be Don Browning, an important book called Generative Man. Generative Man, in which he goes into the foundations of this capacity in a mature man. Well, generativity comes online for this aspect of a man when the lover is accessed adequately and a man is comfortable with this side of himself. The king energy is transformed and, in fact, enabled to be what it was meant to be in the first place. The warrior, instead of compulsive attacks on values, human rights, anybody that's vulnerable, attacks on life, the warrior energy in a man, when it is adequately informed by the lover, begins to assume its true role as a protector of life. You know, that motto that you see so often on police cars should not be a joke. We serve and protect. That is the image of what happens to this warrior energy when it's informed by the lover as it is supposed to be informed. For example, when you get this Greenpeace concept of the rainbow warrior, that's somebody who has gotten connected enough to the body and to the life and to physical world to care about it, so you do something about it. This is the origins of the rainbow warrior. The magician moves from that kind of schizoid detachment we were talking about earlier, that sort of fantasy of value-free theory. You know, anybody that's into this fantasy of value-free theory is a magician who has not connected enough with the lover energy. Because anybody, see, when you're value-free, that means that you're out of touch with this lover energy in an appropriate way. You have no real appropriate connection with it. When the magician configuration in the psyche is balanced appropriately by the lover energy, this detachment goes away. And what do you start to get in human culture? You simply look comparatively in the various cultures of the human race in history. What you begin to get is the healer and the man who assumes his responsibilities as a ritual elder. In other words, what people talk about today as the functioning role of the shaman or the medicine man, or as with the Mescalero Apache, the singer. One who is not at all detached from the people. In fact, it's fascinating to me. There are so many psychotherapists and psychoanalysts that are into these detachment fantasies. You know, the fantasy that to be professional, you're really detached. And in a lot of training schools, they teach that. You know, kind of the fantasy that, well, when you have worked with someone and you terminate with them, you should not ever have any kind of other relationship with them. Now, you know, you can honor that kind of position until you get an education in cultural anthropology. And when you do get a little education in cultural anthropology and ethnopsychiatry, you begin to notice that in traditional cultures, your healer wasn't the one who never saw you again after he healed you. You lived with these people. They had known you from the time that you were little. And they probably know you throughout your entire life cycle. All this fantasy of detachment, what is that? That is a fantasy of a point of view that is a shadow magician who is inadequately informed by this love aspect. And you can tell why is it that love and sexuality is so much in the shadow of psychotherapy, all psychotherapies, all schools. Well, it's because of this particular difficulty. People who are drawn into becoming therapists have problems with this. And that's why you got to beware of psychotherapists, period, but you got to make sure you got to make sure that whoever you see for therapy has had a lot of therapy. Don't go to therapists who have not had. First question you ought to have when you interview a therapist before you decide to see them. Find out how many years of therapy they've had for themselves. That is the only way a therapist can deal with this problem. See, so they don't need to be a voyeur for your life. Okay. And so, but not just the healer aspect, the ritual elder aspect. A man who is inadequately related to the lover will not be able to care enough to serve as a ritual elder for those in his life that he needs to serve as a ritual elder. There's a group of men in the Chicago area that offer an experience called the New Warrior Weekend. One of the things that I'm very impressed with this group of men about is that after they have a weekend, an intense weekend working on men's issues, they have follow-up small groups. And these men take time to be there for each other, and they're not getting paid for it. That's a very impressive thing to me. It's very hard to find men who will be there for you and help you address and deal with your male issues without wanting money for it. And that's why I want you to think about the importance of this kind of experience of men. Because men who will take the time in their lives, in their busy lives, to spend some of it being there, serving as ritual elders for other men, that's a very impressive thing. It used to be something that men assumed. In the pre-modern era, that wasn't unusual. If you were a man in a tribal culture, there were times that the men took to be with you and to help you deal with how difficult it was to be a man. Not in modernity. Most men today live their lives year after year after year without having any time, serious time, with another man or men to talk about the serious issues of their life as men. That is, unless they pay for it. And that's a tragedy. It should be stopped. And there's a lot of movement on this now, around the country. Okay. The lover side of the psyche, for those of you in the room who don't have a problem that the rest of us guys have got, you don't have a problem getting into this and integrating it. What you got a problem of is trying to find your way out of it sometime. You know, you sort of are embarrassed by all the riches of the lover energy in your life. And so you spend a lot of your time trying to figure out which one of your addictions you will use today to try to kind of bind some of this energy. And I've been very serious in my discussions in previous weeks that we've got to look beneath this popularity of addiction today to the powerful energies that fuel it, and understand that these passionate energies, the intensity that so many people who've had problems with addictions experience, that energy is not in itself pathological. And you should never let anybody convince you that it is. The energy itself is not pathological. That's energy that, even though it's manifesting in some self-destructive ways, that is life energy. That's life energy. And again, like the problem with so many of these other things, the problem is always one of stewarding. How does one steward this energy, keep it from wiping me or somebody else out? How can I get out of this energy what it's there for? And so when a person is able to heal the psyche in this lover aspect, if you're in that category, you get an ability to move from this kind of desperation, anxious desperation that a person often lives in that state, and moves from fragmentation to get to the point where one has a capacity to hold that energy better. One develops a capacity to contain and channel that energy better so that one doesn't have to completely isolate oneself from it. One doesn't have to feel bad about the energy, but one can actually experience it more and benefit from it in the way that it was designed to be used. So let's talk about. Well, first of all, let me just stop there. Do you see how all of these things are interlocking? You cannot heal one without reference to the others. Yes.
In this process, I hear you talking about how the lover brings healing to the other three archetypes.
Yes.
Is it possible for it to move the other direction?
It does move. Let me just say that we're going to have to look now at how it in fact does move the other. The question is, the lover heals the other configurations. Does it move the other way also? Yes, it does. And particularly, well, let's just look at that. Let's deal with that right now. And let's deal first with this. If you have this problem with being overwhelmed by this lover energy, if you're an artist, It's very common for artists to have difficulty being overwhelmed by this intensity and having a lot of trouble regulating it. What does the king offer to all of these that no other configuration offers? It offers centering, a taproot, which gives you a center that is not the ego, which can help you regulate all energies. If you do not have the connection with the king, you will be full of anxiety out of all of these. You'll respond to the anxiety differently. But the king, and to be, I mean, if you really were doing the full psyche, it's the conjunctio, the royal couple. If you're not adequately connected to that, you do not have the kind of axis. You do not have the center, the still point around which all of this energy can revolve. And so one of the first things you have to ask yourself, if you have difficulty with emotional and psychological premature ejaculation, is what kind of a connection do I have consciously to the conjunctio, to the archetypal self, as Jung would say? Am I working consciously up front on what Edward Edinger talks about as the ego-self axis? If you've heard my other tapes, I'm constantly emphasizing that is a central issue, the ego-self axis. And in this case, with the king or queen energy, to give you a center which can, it functions for those of you that, like I was as a teenager, into powerful engines. It's like balancing an engine. You balance an engine, you can run it up to 7,000 RPM, so it doesn't shake itself to bits. You can generate enormous horsepower, but it doesn't shake itself to pieces. With the connection to the king, to the conjunctio, you have a centering that makes possible accessing a lot more energy without fragmentation. That is key. So you can see the contribution of the king energy. Without that, whenever I see anyone in my practice, they come in and they're just oozing archetypal energy all over the place, and it's quite clear that they cannot really settle down in any area of their life. Immediately, my first thought is, well, what's this person doing in terms of some sort of spirituality connection with some images of the conjunctio? If it's a woman, I first think, well, does she have any sense whatsoever of a connection to the goddess? Chances are, if a woman has got a very, very serious problem about eating disorders, substance abuse, if you investigate, you will find that that there may be an identification with the goddess, but often there's not a connection, a conscious connection. There has not been, as some of the books have put it, there has not been a descent to the goddess. By the same token, if I run into a man that is glowing red hot when comes in my office, I want to know what kind of spiritual techniques or disciplines he may be using or is not using. I'm assume that he's probably not using it, to disidentify with the king. I mean, here's the rule. If you're not doing something to disidentify with the king or the queen, you've got an unconscious identification with it at some level. And that will make your personality inherently unstable. That is, you may get into a psychotherapy with somebody and have an idealizing transference, which means that you put that projection on that therapist. But do you see? Then all of a sudden I'm calm. If I'm able to idealize my therapist, all of a sudden I'm calmer. But that doesn't mean I've really gotten anywhere. You see that? Can you see that? It doesn't mean I've gotten anywhere until I get an internal connection to that thing which I'm projecting on my therapist. So that's what most people mean when they talk about spirituality, and that's okay with me for them to talk that way. I mean, the full ego self-axis includes a connection, a conscious connection to all of these. But what you get when you're connecting with the king, if you're a man and you're connecting with the king, what you're getting specifically is that taproot that balances your engines and enables you to rev it up more without coming apart. See? Yes. Well, what I mean very simply, the question is what I mean by getting a connections with, say, with the king. I actually mean that very simply in terms of a process of active imagination. You can read Robert Johnson's Inner Workbook for sort of an ABCs of active imagination, or you can get Barbara Hanna's old classic on active imagination called Encounters with the Soul and read that. But it's a lot less important for you to get sophisticated in all the reading about active imagination than that you do it. I have a lot of people that read books on active, but it takes just doing it. And see, when you're writing a dialogue, when you're writing a dialogue with the king, it's a lot harder for you to identify with it. Because the king will say things to you. And this is not speculation, folks. I have done this with men and women all over the country. And so I'm not recommending some mystical thing at all. I'm just saying this is an empirical exercise. Experiment with it. If you're not experimenting with it, then you haven't really made any effort. See, we're not talking ontological issues or metaphysical issues. You can do that if you want to theologize about this. People throughout history have. But the real issue is, if you will do active imagination with these imagos, it will have, I will guarantee, it will have an impact on your psyche. And if you do active imagination and form a relationship with the king imago, or for you women with the queen imago, it will calm you down. You try it. I don't care how crazy you think you are. The crazier you are, the more you ought to be doing it. There are people that will say to you, oh, if you're really crazy, don't you do active imagination? Ooh. You got to be seeing me if you do active imagination. Well, I understand that. Marketing is important. But if you're real crazy, do active imagination with the king and the queen. That will help you get real disidentified with the grandiosity in your psyche. Now, if somebody asks you, well, now, is that king God? Tell them you don't know. You just talk to them all the time. See? So you'll ask them the next time you talk to them. Say, are you God, sir? See, and then see what they say. Sometimes they say, most of the time they say no when you ask. But you have to ask the one in you. I don't know what he'll say. But you can find out that's an empirical scientific enterprise. So we're not talking theology here or something mystical. You just a scientific psychological experiment, which you can do. But I am making an assertion based on my clinical experience. If you're real crazy, start your active imaginations with the king and the queen and get that relationship going first. because it will calm you down and give you a sense of calmness. Try it. See what I mean? Yeah. Yeah. The question is that say he had done an exercise in one of the classes on the king where he got in touch with a bored king within. My comment about this is very common when you first begin. A lot of people have a hard time finding a nurturing royal couple within. But that is, to me, what you want to do is you talk to this shadow king. Ask him where you got him in your family. Where did you learn that the important persons were to be bored with you? And ask him how you treat other people the way he's treating you. I mean, there's always something to learn from these figures. And Jung's point always was, when you're doing active imagination, you never become vulnerable to these psychic contents. That's wrong. You protect yourself from them. You form a firm relationship with these figures. But the point is, you do need to keep going back to the throne room until you find the king who is not bored with you, who does wish you well. And my experience with men and women is that when they do continue going back, they do make that connection. If you're very wounded in your family experience, it will be harder for you to find a nurturing king. But people do it. And this is not speculation. People do it. But it is, as Robert Johnson says, it's not fun. It's inner work. It is work. You have to keep going back. Okay, but let me go on now to the warrior thing. There is a quality about the lover that we've got to get clear about tonight. It's key to get the point that we need to make tonight, and that is, you know, that poem, something there is that does not love a wall. Well, that's the lover then. The lover does not love a wall. Remember, we said that the lover goes across boundaries, doesn't understand boundaries, is into union, participation mystique. It's into being with, unification. The Christians have this at one-ment, right? Atonement. At one-ment. That's the lover. See? Well, that's wonderful, and that's the lover doing its thing. But you see, the lover by itself, if you've got a lot of lover energy in your psyche and it's really flooding you, what this means is that you're a very vulnerable person, because the lover by itself is extremely vulnerable. And I want to make something stand out to you here, and that is, I don't think vulnerability is a virtue in human player. Receptiveness is a virtue. Sensitivity is a virtue. Vulnerability is what you have when you are mainlining a lot of lover energy, but you have not developed the other sides of this thing. What is the role of the warrior in this? It is the warrior's job to protect the garden of your life. That's got to be a clear assignment. Because if the warrior does not protect the lover space in your life, there won't be any. Can you see why that is? It's only the warrior aspect of the self that can draw a line and say, step across this and I'll cut it off. So why do you think at the gate of the Garden of Eden they put down these guards? That's because without the guards, there's no garden. Yes. The question is, what about people that build up walls all around them? He says they're not vulnerable at all. I say exactly the opposite. I say they are incredibly vulnerable. A person who cannot attain intimacy is a person who is radically vulnerable. And if you do not have your warrior self constellated, you will not be able to sustain intimacy. That's what people do not understand. That is to say, how are you going to be able to sustain intimacy in a relationship? By having a dependable warrior. I want you to think about that. If you are a man who cannot sustain an intimate relationship, the chances are that it is not because, you fly off the handle and you go into your great rages and you raise hell and you may be even violent. That doesn't mean your warrior is developed. A man that loses his temper and gets violent is a man who does not have a consolidated warrior. The man who has a consolidated warrior does not lose his temper. He is able to contain this infantile aggression. He's able to use the warrior energy to protect life, his love life. See? Now, the warrior isn't the lover. You put him out there at the gate. You say, now, stay out here and don't let me be interrupted. Do not accept any other appointments. Think about that. So many of us have so little warrior energy that we will fill up our calendars to the point that there is no time for the garden. This is a chronic problem in marriages today. I tell you, there are so many couples for whom both the man and the woman, all they do is work. They do not bother to set aside time for them to get into the garden. And folks, if it's not set aside and protected, it will not exist. Yes?
Why do you think so many men and women are like that? And I think, why do you think?
I think it's because they do not understand. The question is, why are so many men and women like that? It is really epidemic now, and a lot of divorces are caused by this. Because we don't understand how fragile that lover space is. If you understand how fragile the lover space in your life is and how precious it is and how it has to be protected, then you will send some, you will find your Fifth Army and you will say, get over there and protect that. You will call up and you'll get your inner George S. Patton and you'll say, Patton, now I want you to take your tanks and I want you to go over here and I want you to take my weekend. I don't want any incursions into my weekend. I don't care how important it is that I do something meaningful or something socially responsible. See? Because, all this seductive, come on now, you've got to do this important job. See? It's very important that you see me. I know those other people are not important. It's important that you see me. Schedule a little more time. See? Take on one more job. See? After all, she married you. You can take her for granted. Yeah. Right? And it's not just men do that. There are a lot of women today that, they're married. This guy's married. He's the father of children. And I'm going back to school now. I'll see you. And watch. He's going to put up with that. Well, that's naive. You'll see, there's going to be somebody come along that's got the keys to the garden. And you're out there, being the 190 proof warrior, And somebody would come along and say, hey, come on over here. You got the money, I got the time. Mm-hmm. I'm not kidding you, it happens all the time. Well, so why does it happen so much? It's because people don't understand how vulnerable the lover is. And this garden space, it's like that's why it's so fantasized as an oasis, out there in the desert. It's this oasis, kind of a magical oasis. Now you see it, now you don't. Well, the reason we have all those fantasies about that is because it will disappear on you just like that if you don't protect it. And this is why so many people think, well, what happens after marriage? Well, the lover side disappears. Well, it disappears not because there's anything necessarily inherent about marriage. It's just that people stop putting energy into the garden space. When you're in that first bloom of love, you will pay any price, you will bear any burden, to get into the garden with him or her, And after you marry, make an appointment. Well, you got to look at that because see, if the warrior in you has not kind of listened up to this issue and is not alert to the task of protecting this space, then there won't be any in your life, and your life will become a desert. See? And that's the story for so many people. See? Now, the mega stuff is obvious. What you need with that, because as we'll see next quarter when we're talking about this, it's the magician in you that has got a sense of the geography, all of it, and has a sense of being aware when you hadn't been there lately, when you hadn't been into this room lately, or when you hadn't been into that room lately. And the magician part of you will kind of tug at you and say, hey, have you noticed anything? What do you mean? I'm doing great. I'm achieving this. I'm achieving that. I'm achieving this. I'm achieving that. Well, have you noticed anything else? See, because when you get into a lot of these spaces, if you're into that generativity, caring for the world and everything, caring for the family, caring for the children, caring for the institution, whatever, you can just get lost in that. So the magician is your awareness. And you really got to get to the point where you understand that thing has to scan. You can't be without that. That thing has to be scanning. You don't want to have your magician turned off. It needs to be scanning so that it is aware when you start really getting out of shape. When you start getting misshapen, when you start turning into a monster, your magician needs to call you up. Say, wake up. So you can see how these different aspects, all of them are necessary. See, all of them are necessary, but there is a mutually interdependent relationship between these four configurations, and when you start acknowledging them, when you start accessing them, when you start receiving each of their gifts, then you start moving toward what Jung talked about as individuation, because you start getting some semblance of that wholeness that is the sort of dominant image in Jung's thought. Now, let me stop there for some questions and comments. Yeah.
This one, when I try active imagination with my lover, and obviously that's difficult for me, I'm not a man who's at ease with that. A message that keeps coming back is use me more in your work life. Mm-hmm. And I can see a sense that my wife and I are good friends and there aren't major things there, although there's improvement. Mm-hmm. But I'm not, it doesn't click with me as how the lover would fit in the work life. My sense is it's important.
Okay, the question is, when he does active imagination with the lover says, use me more in your work life. Well, you see, the lover is not just something that applies to the genitals. See, this is the genius of Freud and the Freudian tradition. They understand that when you mature psychosexually, there is a kind of a erotic quality that one can experience. That's what they mean when you hear this word sublimation. Now, for a classical Freudian, that is not as negative a thing as we like, when we're shooting at the Freudians, we like to make it sound as negative as possible. But that is not really, in their purview, a negative thing. It simply means that you can feel this energy, you can feel this life energy, this libidinal sort of joyful involvement with life. It means you're overcoming your necrophilia, and you are not bored. If you're bored with your work, you do need that lover energy infusing it. And it will do it. I will, after the break, I'll read you a poem by D.H. Lawrence, which directly addresses this issue. When you start getting in touch with this poet within, which is really a form of the lover, things start getting more luminous. You could argue that when you're really in touch with this, you're never bored. See? What is a mark of the narcissistically really damaged personality? They are bored a lot. When you start getting healed, you're more passionate and less bored. You start having a lot more enthusiasm about everything you do. They say, well, that's manic, that's manic. That's a depressed psychologist talking. I'm not kidding you. There are a lot of depressed psychologists that envy the hell out of your enthusiasm and want to pathologize it. I'm not kidding you. Yeah.
Teenagers always say they're bored. Does that mean that they're just not developed, or is that somebody?
They just haven't developed their vocabulary enough.
Well, with the question about teenagers saying they're always bored, is that related to some kind of pathology? Well, we wouldn't want to pathologize about adolescents in that way, but you would say that they've got so much of this lover energy rolling through them in the hormone, that, in that case, it's more of a defense against it. We defend against the great energies in our personality whenever we're not really sure that we can channel them appropriately without fragmenting. So in other words, if you're really having a hard time kind of riding the horse, you're going to say, you're sitting up on this big stallion, this big stallion that wants to run, and you're saying to yourself, I'm not interested in horseback riding. In fact, I don't even believe in horses. A lot of people do that. In fact, you get somebody that tells you, I'm just wooden inside. I'm just real depressed, I'm wooden inside. They're sitting up there on big stallion, trying to not know it. See? And that's what that movie Equus is about. That depressed psychiatrist played by Richard Burton. That's kind of funny. Richard Burton playing a depressed psychiatrist. But trying to stay away from that big sensuous horse in himself. And the young boy, not as sophisticated as the psychiatrist, is less afraid of the horse. See?
Is there any particular reason why somebody would be afraid of that? A teenager or,
Why, any particular reason why someone should be afraid of this great horse within? Yeah, because if it runs away with you, it's dangerous. And those big horses run away with you.
Yeah, maybe I phrased it wrong. I was wondering why the teenager is, it's a common thing.
Yeah.
I'm bored.
Yeah. Well, see, the development of your ego self axis You can think about that as learning to ride. That's the way you ought to think about that. And I don't mean an old plug. When your ego self-axis is developed, then you can ride a real horse. And so when you think, if you know anything about horseback riding, if you ever really rode a real horse, then you know why people are scared of it. You better be scared of a real horse until, through your respect, you kind of build a relationship. You never master a real horse. See? You kind of befriend it. You teach him what he can get away with and what he can't, but you don't ever try to convince him that he's just an old plow horse. It won't work. Let's take a break and come back in about before we get going, because we're going to run out of time soon. I passed out in one of the other classes copies of the Ally Press catalog, and I want to say, and I haven't really made enough of this yet. We'll make a little more of it in a minute, but someone said to me last week, I think it was Dave Franchak said to me, well, Bob, it said this room is sort of, this is not lover space. This is more like, mega space, magician space. That's right. And we need to be alert that that's one of the reasons why I don't like large classes, because there's much less interpersonal contact, and there's less real capacity for relating when there's so many folk. But it's also just in terms of the ritual nature of the space. This is a classroom. At least, in the last class we didn't even have any carpeting on the floor. If you go to a Bly conference, the space can really include more of these archetypal configurations. I mean, it's you get a much richer combination of the masculine self. But not the least of which is the centrality of poetry in a Bly conference. It's no accident, I think, that the thing which men have found so empowering and healing is being led by a great poet. And it's also interesting that this is not a 35-year-old poet or a 40-year-old poet. This is a poet who has come into his generativity, and hence can carry a lot of the projections of men of this energy we're talking about tonight, and also the king energy. So I think it's important to realize that a lot of the excitement that people experience through Robert Bly and his work is because men have such trouble integrating this lover energy in a generative way. Now, we're good at splitting it off. I mean, we can split off with the best, but to integrate it into a full life in a generative way is a real individuation task for men. And I think that is why people respond so much to Bly. And so I want you to have the address where you can get the Ally Press Center catalog. Write Paul Feroe, F-E-R-O-E, at 524 Orleans Street, St. Paul, Minnesota, 55107. Or you can call the Ally Press Center at 1-800-729-3002. They have an up-to-date list of men's events around the country where you can have a more rich experience of the presence and energy of men who are working on these resources. In that catalog that they send out is a lot of Bly's own work, but also selections of other poets that he's translated. One could say, and not be very far off the mark, that a man who neither reads nor writes poetry has a long way to go in his own development, and certainly in his development as a lover. I think that, so if we're talking about resourcing, so start working on the poetic side of yourself. Where to start? Start with Bly. And then start with the people Bly loves. And then when you get familiar with those, then you can range out. He will have introduced you to enough people through that catalog that you will be encompassing worlds then. One of the things is a beautiful thing and really was amazing to me at the first Bly conference I ever went to was men offering each other poems. You know. Now, I've been given a lot of things by men, a lot of grief, no, but I had never had a man give me a poem. And one of the things that often happens at one of these conferences is that that men are given the space, the ritual space, where they don't have to be ashamed. They can be shameless and give a poem. And it is an amazing thing to be with a lot of very powerful men who shamelessly offer poems that they love to each other. So that is a big resource. And I could not emphasize the healing importance of both reading and writing poetry. I could not overemphasize it, yes. The question is the reason for this because men are not in touch with the anima, the female part within? I think that's a classical Jungian argument, and I think that there's deep truth in it, but what I want to emphasize is that men, when they become lovers, do not get that solely from the feminine. There is a masculine lover within who loves the feminine lover. Now, it's very interesting. See, it is the lover within that cares about relating to the other. You know, the Freudians have put so much emphasis on the capacity to develop an investment in a separate other being. And the classical Freudians make a lot of, they quite rightly emphasize how difficult it is to get to where you can separate enough to love. It's very interesting. And so when you connect with a lover, you value everything, but it makes you capable of relating to the inner feminine and the outer feminine as well. So it's like it all rises together, see? Those capacities rise together. If you're not really in touch with the lover part of yourself, you won't be able to value even familiar things much less real strange things. Right? Yeah, somebody else back here.
Twice a year.
Got a little commercial here for the journal Inroads in the men's movement. And Bly's comment, the gentleman was offering Bly's comment about having realized in his midlife that he was not connected enough to his masculine. Clearly, think back to what we were talking about before the break. I mean, it is amazing how much problems a man will have with intimacy until he can consolidate enough of his masculine identity so that he does not fear losing the self when he is in relationship to a woman. Most men fear losing their selfhood if they get into intimacy. It is very difficult for women to understand this. Very often women ridicule men a lot about this. There's a lot of very, very humiliating, ridiculing talk among a lot of women today about this thing about men. And you know, the thing is that what women are seeing is there's a lot of truth in it. Men have difficulty with this, but it's not something that's funny. And it's not something that should be ridiculed. It is a part of the burden of becoming a mature man to be able to deal with intimacy without fearing the total loss of self in Kohut's sense of self. The little less self, or your human self, not the archetypal self. Well, how does a man get to where he can stand intimacy? Well, he gets to where he can stand intimacy by getting more deeply into his own masculine selfhood. That's a rule. If you're having difficulty in your relationships with women, you've got to get deeper into the masculine side of the conjunctio. Once you're rooted adequately there, and I think particularly in this king business, you will not fear losing yourself in relationship. It's hard for people to understand that, but this is the key. For the masculine problem with love and intimacy. This is why so many men would rather fight any war than to try to stick with an intimate relationship with a woman. Yeah. Yes.
Well, in my opinion, I think that a lot of women are quite afraid of intimacy also. They talk about it a lot, but they're just as afraid of men. And I was wondering, if you're familiar with the Mermaid and the Minotaur, do you think that her philosophy, Dorothy Bishop's philosophy of why that's so because of early caregiver and that sort of thing? I mean, what do you think about that?
It's a complicated question, but it relates to the same thing. I mean, the question is something about women having a similar parallel difficulty. But I think that the difficulty is caused in the parallel way. If a woman is not adequately grounded in her connection with the queen within, she will tend to fear getting into intimacy with any male, particularly who has any personal power. See? If the man has any personal power, she will fear him. Well, she will fear him because she does not accept her own power enough. How does she accept her own power? A woman accepts her own power by a deep grounding in the queen pole of the feminine psyche. She doesn't need, all these people that talk about, well, get the animus developed, get the animus developed, get the masculine side of the woman. Well, that's fine. But if you really understand this messianic queen within, you don't need to get your strength and power from the masculine side of your personality.
Well, how do you think that relates to, maybe you didn't want to deal with this, but how does it relate to the early caregiver being the mother? Does it all, and is that why men can't get that from that?
Well, I mean, yeah, I don't want to spend my time working on feminine psychology tonight, but I would say that when a woman has a problem relating to the queen within, the place she got that, it's the caregiver. She got that in problems with her mother. Well, right. Well, there's a lot of writing now about the differences developmentally between men and women. And they're pointing out the radical differences in terms of what issues come up for men compared with what issues come up for women. And that's a very, very rich field, but I don't want to get into that tonight, except to say that men, in my view, the way men, if you were to do a statistical run on men across the world, the typical developmental sequence of their getting comfortable with their archetypal configurations goes like this: warrior, magus, lover, king. And statistically speaking, the lover stuff in a man does not really start getting consolidated for great numbers of men until midlife. And the king, if it's ever consolidated, often does not come online until the 50s. This has a lot to do with why, if you have had a man treat you well, it's much more likely that it was your grandfather or an older uncle than it was your father. See? And I think there's probably a parallel pattern in women's experience, but it is not the same. It's not the same order. So if you look at it the way I look at it, men and women have to develop very similar potentialities, and in one deep sense are very equal in terms of the fullness, the potentials that they can develop, but they don't in terms of patterns. If you look at the patterns, they do not typically develop them at the same time in the same sequence. And for men, see, this lover business is hard. The only thing harder for men is the king energy. That's the only thing that's harder for men to develop. So anyway, let me talk a little bit more about resources, and then we can have some time for questions. But now, you may think I'm joking a little bit now, but dance is an important resource. You got to understand something about the archetypal lover. If it talks words at all, it's poetry or song. But a lot of the time, it doesn't like to talk. It likes to move. It likes to dance. And you don't see this so clearly in modern culture, particularly modern middle class, upper middle class, tight, uptight culture. But if you travel around the world and you visit, as I've done, a lot of the peoples that are off the beaten track. If you go up the rivers in Borneo and visit the Sea Dayaks, the headhunters, and you're there after the evening starts and they begin to have their festivals, the women dance, they dress up in their finery. It's really wonderful. and then the men dance. And if you want to see something spectacular in pre-modern tribal cultures, you wait around till the men start coming out to dance, because they know how to dress up. You know, you kind of stay around middle-class American circles, and you would think that men in their wiring didn't know anything about dressing up, you know, gray suits. You know? But if you study pre-modern cultures and you look at men at play, they dress up and they are shameless about it. And they dance. And the color is bold and makes no apologies. And the headdresses are magnificent. And go to a blind conference and come to Carnival, and you may have a little experience of some of these headdresses. But that is one of the things you got to get a sense for, that there was something that was there for men in pre-modern cultures that is not present in middle class, certainly not in middle class white culture for men now. Now, I take this a little personally, because when I put on my Stetson and I walk down the street where the folks are that don't understand hats, you know, you get funny looks. You ever try that? But there are folk around who understand hats. But they're not middle class whites. They are still much more in touch with tribal culture. And I mean this around the world. You see this. But it's a very interesting phenomenon. Men being able to dress up. Another thing I will say to men about this, I mean, dance is one thing. And if you go out dancing, if you're having trouble with your lover, take dance lessons. Any kind of dance lessons. And it won't be long till you'll be in a little better touch with your lover. I mean, everything from modern dance. I mean, one of the things I'd love to do soon is to take some African dance. Have you ever seen a Zulu man when he feels good? Yeah. I mean, if you've been watching the news in South Africa, have you noticed the South African people's response with dance to Mandela's release? There's the feast of love. And in a way, I mean, when you see that coming out, then you can feel this lover energy come out. And these uptight males around, it scares them to death when they see that.
Interesting how some religious groups suppress dancing.
Yeah, a lot of religious groups suppress dancing. And the reason they suppress it is because they know that it will put you directly in touch. Do not pass go, do not go to jail. Directly in touch with the lover. What do you think happened when rock and roll came on, folks? I mean, when rock and roll came in the late 50s, we started getting wholesale invocation of a fairly primal lover. And there will always be rock and roll for this reason. Once you're ever in touch with it, you're never going to give it up. Long live rock and roll. Thank you, Chuck Berry. But so poetry and dance, and I'm not kidding you. If I'm working with a man that tells me he's out of touch with his lover, So you want to spend a lot of money, or do you want to get better? We can have a lot of sessions discussing this, or you can go take some dance lessons. So that's another one. Active imagination, you've heard my rap about that. You do active imagination with all these figures to kind of get some balance, but start talking to the lover within very directly. And start asking him what he wants, and don't be shocked when he tells you. See? As Jung says, you don't have to give these inner figures everything they want. But you do need to listen, because it would be nice if you knew what the inner lover wanted and who they wanted. See? You don't have to give it to them. But if you're not in discussion, you may find yourself acting out in a way that you cannot believe shortly. Yes?
Isn't there a fear of spontaneity too and emotion? Because I'm a street musician, and when I play in the subway, I see it every day, people being horrified of
You're so shameless, man.
$1, and then they get on the train, but they wait till everyone's not looking, and then I throw the money in. But it's just like an incredible fear of expressing how they feel and dance and music and all that kind of.
This gentleman is a street musician. He's just observing on the threat levels of people that he meets in the subway when he's playing, and I think that see, the troubadour, the musician, always is a boundary breaker. And if somebody wants to have neat boundaries, and the musician comes along, they know that's not written anywhere very final. And so this is why people in all cultures they're a little afraid of this. You remember Plato? He wanted to get rid of the poets. What do we need? Well, we need a society where we have philosopher kings and get rid of these poets. See? Because of the going over these boundaries. Don't like these walls. See? And for those of you that really are into the scholarship of all this, read Victor Turner's work on ritual process and look at the relationship between liminality and communitas. Communitas is what? It is that space which happens in the interstices of culture, on the boundaries, in the cracks, in the bars, on the edge, which is where the revolution always comes. The reform movements come through the cracks, and it is a blurring of boundaries. In communitas, which Victor Turner, the great anthropologist, pointed out, is everywhere in the world. You see it. You see this communitas breaking boundaries, breaking status roles. You think you know who you are, communitas comes along, you got carnival. Everybody's statuses are reversed, or status is wiped out. So the lover thing is frightening to people, see? And if you don't have a good, clear sense of yourself, you can see why. Yourself will disappear. And all of a sudden you'll become an archetype. Do something a little bit troublesome. Okay. So, active imagination, you've got some resources on that. And the thing, you get in there and you talk to the lover to get a sense of what they're up to. You'll be amazed. Polymorphous perversity. What your lover may be into. See? But you need to know. See? Other questions or comments? Yes, back here. The hat thing, yeah.
My father used to wear a hat. Everybody used to wear a hat. He did his movies in the 40s, and everybody had a hat on. What happened?
I don't know.
Nobody wears a hat.
Killed that.
John Kennedy when he was an
Yeah.
Irish. The hat actors hated him for it.
Incidentally, you have the hat stored wrong, you're gonna lose the form and the brim.
There you
It's all right, I work at hat shop.
Well, everything, hats go right back in terms of culture to crowns. To crowns. Hats are related to crowns culturally. They go back. They have always been emblems of authority in some sense, some sort of sense of power related to hats. Do what? Yes, yes. With the yarmulke, the issue is clear about authority. It's whose authority it is. See, the yarmulke is a part of a cultural complex which includes the Sabbath, see, and circumcision. So there's a different kind of thing in the yarmulke. The yarmulke is not so much a shameless celebration of an individual man's beauty as it is a statement about who is the one under whom all of the creativity of that man is stewarded. See, so there's a different usage of that, but it still has to do with crown. See, crowns is something, we ought to look at crowns archetypally and try to understand what crowns are. Crowns are extremely important for both men and women in mythology. And it has to do with full authority for all sorts of things. Well, the lover, see, for the lover to be fully developed, there's got to be a capacity for shamelessness in a man about certain things. I mean, there are a lot of things a man ought to be ashamed about. But there are some things that he shouldn't be so ashamed about. He shouldn't be ashamed to appear. And he shouldn't be ashamed of his body. And he shouldn't be ashamed to fill up all of his space. And that's what the lover is about. The lover, remember what did we say early on? The lover is about play, a man's play, and it is about his display. So when your lover gets more healed, you'll be a lot more interested in clothes and fashion. See? I mean, the state of men's fashion in our culture is a statement about the state of the men's lovers within. I mean, if a man has little enough interest in himself to pay no attention to how he dresses, then you can tell something about where he's hurt. See? He's got a lot of shame issues. God knows I don't want to be seen, and if I dress, somebody's going to notice me. See? And again, if you got a lot of depressed therapists around, they'll tell you that any man that dresses up is manicky. See? If you show up in one of those $1,000 long, gorgeous leather coats, they'll be sure you're sick. Of course, they really envy the hell out of you. They charge you more. Well, they'll charge you more. They'll charge you more, right? But they wouldn't be able ever to buy the coat. Oh. But anyway, this is an issue. You know, a lot of men, when they're real undeveloped, love to make fun of women for women's attention to fashion and clothes and appearance, things like that. And what that shows you doesn't show anything. It shows that women are in touch with the lover side. Because when you're in touch with the lover side, you appreciate things. All things. You appreciate things. And you're shameless about it. Nobody's going to shame you about appreciating things. And a man who doesn't understand how beautiful things are is a man who is not healed in his lover. Now, he may not have the money to buy them, but you know, it's very interesting. If you travel in cultures where poverty still reigns, even more than ours, you will notice that poor men dress up. They're not intimidated by this business, and it doesn't cost so much to dress up. See, what it costs is you got to be able to be in touch with your lover. And you know, you don't have to be rich to dress up, see, except in spirit. You've got to be rich in spirit to dress up. Yeah.
Said when these guys get turned on by these insulting deals and all sorts of that stuff.
Well, I don't know that that's the opposite. The comment is something about, what about men being turned on by women who are really turned out? I think that is probably a projection. See, that's probably there's a lot of letting the woman carry the lover for the man. And this is typical of a lot of relationships where the man expects his partner to carry all that lover energy for them. She's the one that's spontaneous. She's the one that has ideas of things to do. She's the one that has an eye for clothes. She's the one that has an eye for going to plays. She's the one that has an eye, well, let's go do something. You know? There's a country song about that, but I won't bore you with it. Yeah.
I want to get back to what you were saying about, being an artist and so on. And you made a comment last week that we don't want artists who are masochists, and if you're going out and you're breaking these boundaries, you're going to encounter a lot of conflict with people.
Well, you see, the comment is about my statement about hoping that artists can get out of a masochistic position so they don't have to carry the lover for the whole society. See, this is what happens a lot. Artists of all kinds, from actors and actresses to all different types of artists, carry in projected form. They are the receptacle for the disowned lover of the rest of the society. It's not just the artist. You could do a lot of psychology of deviance this way. Psychology of deviant behaviors, so-called deviant behaviors, is because of splitting in the personalities of the people in the dominant culture. So all I'm saying is, I don't think you need to volunteer to be the goat. And if you are an artist, you have to realize that there are a lot of people that would like to eat you up in order to connect with life so that they will feel animated. And this is a simple archetypal pattern, and I'm just saying, let people get in touch with their own lover. See, you need to be able to have a warrior protect, the artist has to have a warrior protect them from being sacrificed by other people's agendas. This is a typical thing. It's nothing new. Yes?
But men fearing losing their self
Yes.
in intimacy, and that the king maybe was especially important.
Yes.
How do I relate that to the early discussions about the importance of a warrior in protecting us from being vulnerable?
Yes. The question is about the different roles of the king and the warrior in terms of facilitating and protecting the lover. The king stuff provides centeredness and calmness. It is what gets you a taproot so that you don't get so frightened by your own passion that you have to shut it down. Now that's an internal issue, right? Follow that?
Yeah.
So in other words, you got several things that are problematic. Part of it is your own passion. Regulating your own passion. The way you ground that is through the king. You get the taproot down so that you're not so afraid of all this energy. The warrior has to protect you from other people. and to be there so clearly for you that you know that when you open yourself to the other, someone asked me to talk a little bit more about intimacy, when you open yourself to the other, that you know when the abuse starts, that the warrior will intervene, period. And I mean against verbal abuse. Men absorb an incredible amount of verbal abuse. And men are real slow in understanding how to defend themselves against verbal abuse. That's when they're most vulnerable. Men have to learn to have their inner warrior put on the armor plate when the abuse starts, so that they can still think. You see, if you have no armor and you're being verbally abused, and there's a lot of interest in circles today about looking at this phenomenon of verbal abuse. See, there are a lot of abused men out here in this world. There are a lot of men who have been repeatedly beaten by their women in their relationships. And they don't talk about this because it's so shameful. But I have seen many men who have been repeatedly attacked physically by the women in their relationships. It's not something men talk about, but it happens a lot. But even more important is the verbal abuse, the sadistic verbal abuse that men often do not know how to protect themselves against. One man that I work with has a very creative imaginal technique, and I got permission to offer this to you. He's been trying to work on getting better armor against this so that he can maintain his sanity in the context where this is happening. And so he goes and looks at medieval armor in museums. Think about it. A man who cannot imagine himself armored will not be able to continue contact in the heat of discussion. You know? It's interesting. I hadn't thought about it in that context. This comment about the relation of this to something that is in the Parsifal traditions. This is where we have to understand. Men must learn to protect their heart from anyone who would destroy it, male or female. Robert Bly is wise on this. He talks about this a lot. He's absolutely right. Because if you cannot protect your heart, then you know what you're going to do? You're going to be abused once. You're going to be abused twice. You're going to be abused some more. But you will start going away, and you will begin to go away, and no one will be able to find you. See? There are a lot of men, you know that song, Desperado, why don't you come to your senses? You better let somebody love you before it's too late. Well, how come that guy's a desperado? See, it's because men don't learn to take care of themselves and learn they don't have to be. Robert Bly's got this clear. You don't have to have your feelings hurt just because somebody says something ugly to you. If you get your feelings hurt a lot, it's because you're not adequately protected. And if you're not adequately protected, you will be pathologically vulnerable. And if you're pathologically vulnerable, you will not sustain intimacy in any relationship. See, that is something that's hard for people to understand because vulnerability has been touted as this great virtue in relationships. That is the biggest crock that has ever been perpetrated on the American public. Yes.
When you keep coming up with this image of taproot,
Yes.
king, and that sort of, to me, you know, even though you said space the king is cosmos, it still has this idea of being the garden.
It's the center.
And so if you're talking about the space of the garden work, in which you say is the lower space, how would you talk about how the queen fits in the lower space? I think the idea I'm getting from you is that the image of the king that comes from the space of the lover.
Well, see, you got to understand the way the question has to do with the iconography, really, of kingship and the garden and so forth. These mythic systems are all related. They're not separate. See, the tree in the garden is the king. See, the tree of life in the Garden of Eden it equates mythically to the king. See, and so you got to work with Mercy Eliade's work on all this mythic symbolism and the way in which these images relate to each other. And you can also look at at Northrop Frye's The Anatomy of Criticism and his book on the Great Code, where the relationship between these go. At the deepest level, mythically, remember in some of my other classes I've pointed out that the image of God, the male representation of God, combines all of these things in one, in a person, divine personage. So in that sense, right, the king is the lover, is the warrior, is the sorcerer, see? And that corresponds at the mythic level to the individuated man who carries the king, and carries the warrior, and carries the lover, and carries the magician in a balanced way. So that's subtleties there, but Eliade will help you with that if you look at Cosmos and History and Patterns in Comparative Religion and those books like that. Let's take another couple of questions, and I want to read you a poem. Yeah.
Jealousy or in particular, say, a jealous poet, a person may live in touch with their lover that's also jealous.
Well, jealousy is a very complicated topic, and a lot more complicated than I can really address here. But it's always related to a sense of vulnerability, and a sense of being in danger of being very wounded in oneself. If you're chronically jealous, that probably indicates some real narcissistic pathology, where one is just chronically vulnerable and has the feeling. If I'm related to you, we're in a relationship, and you're into really charming a lot of other men, and in my presence. Now, if I'm very, very narcissistically vulnerable, I will have a sense of the shuddering of myself over that, because then you're in a self-object relationship with me, and I complete myself through you. And if you left me, I would just die. I would not be able. People will say to me, "I just couldn't live without her." I say, "Give me a break. Give me a break. Come on. What is this?" So there's your narcissistic vulnerability. And because, it's like if a lover wants to be with somebody else, you got to be able to be healthy enough to be able to say goodbye. That's one of the things about the lover side, the lover thing. When it's healthy, it doesn't own anybody. It does not possess other people. And see, it's always amazing to me, these people that would want to keep someone in a relationship with them against the person's will. That's not love. That is narcissistic pathology. And so when your selfhood is secure and somebody doesn't want to be with you, you give them a blessing and let them go. Let me read you a poem, or a couple. Now, I'm not going to read any Roberts. See, Robert Bly's, because I'm practicing on my Bly accent. But I wanted to read you a D.H. Lawrence poem or two to give you a sense about this question was asked earlier about the relationship between the lover within and work. And listen carefully to this, because Lawrence has forgotten more than most of us will ever know about the archetypal lover. And so this is the portable D.H. Lawrence. For those of you who are like me, a little tone deaf about these things, it's a good place to start. But listen to this. This is one of his poems entitled, "We Are Transmitters." As we live, we are transmitters of life. And when we fail to transmit life, life fails to flow through us. That's part of the mystery of sex. It's a flow onwards. Sexless people transmit nothing. And if, as we work, we can transmit life into our work, life, still more life, rushes into us to compensate, to be ready. And we ripple with life through the days. You get that? And we ripple with life through the days. Even if it's a woman making an apple dumpling or a man a stew, if life goes into the pudding, good is the pudding, good is the stew. Content is the woman with fresh life rippling into her. Content is the man. Give, and it shall be given unto you, is still the truth about life. But giving life is not so easy. It doesn't mean handing it out to some mean fool or letting the living dead eat you up. It means kindling the life quality where it was not, even if it's only in the whiteness of a washed pocket handkerchief. This man knows what he's talking about. It's called We Are Transmitters. And whoever walks a mile full of false sympathy walks to the funeral of the whole human race. In other words, you don't have the lover, you're going to be doing good works out of necrophilia. And whoever forces himself to love anybody begets a murderer in his own body. All this duty business about our responsibilities, without the lover, everything is cold and dead and you don't want to do anything. And he's saying don't do it. You'll cause trouble more than you're worth. But here's the poem that I want to close with tonight. And I want to say this is a poem that was one given to me at the first Bly conference I ever attended, and it's one that gives you a different view. Now we talk. I love to talk about these Earth First ecological warriors, and I've said that it's the lover in men that makes them into people really concerned about the environment, really concerned about it. And you know, it's interesting in the light of the whaling industry today, this particular poem, Doug Cost, the artist and storyteller and man of many gifts that works a lot with Bly, gave this to the entire conference. And let me read this to you, and then we'll stop, and I'll stick around for some discussion afterwards. It's entitled, Whales Weep Not. They say the sea is cold, but the sea contains the hottest blood of all, and the wildest and the most urgent. All the whales in the wider deeps, hot are they as they urge on and dive beneath the icebergs. The right whales, the sperm whales, the hammerheads, the killers, there they blow, hot, wild, white breath out of the sea. And they rock through the sensual, ageless ages on the depths of the seven seas. And through the salt they reel with drunk delight. And in the tropics tremble they with love, and roll with massive, strong desire like gods. And then the great bull lies up against his bride in the blue deep of the sea. As mountain pressing on mountain in the zest of life, and out of the inward roaring of the inner red ocean of whale blood, the long tip reaches strong, intense, like the maelstrom tip, and comes to rest in the clasp and the soft, wild clutch of a she-whale's fathomless body. And over the bridge of the whale's strong phallus, linking the wonder of whales, the burning archangels under the sea keep passing back and forth. Keep passing, archangels of bliss, from him to her, from her to him. Great cherubim that wait on whales in mid-ocean, suspended in the waves of the sea. Great heaven of whales in the waters, old hierarchies. And enormous mother whales lie dreaming, suckling their whale tender young, and dreaming with strange whale eyes wide open in the waters of the beginning and the end. And bull whales gather their women and whale calves in a ring when danger threatens on the surface of the ceaseless flood, and range themselves like great fierce seraphim facing the threat, encircling their huddled monsters of love. And all this happiness in the sea, in the salt, where God is also love, but without words. And Aphrodite is the wife of whales, most happy, happy she. And Venus among the fishes skips, and is the she-dolphin. She is the gay, delighted porpoise, sporting with love in the sea. She is the female tunny fish, round and happy among the males, and dense with happy blood, dark rainbow bliss in the sea. That's why you join Greenpeace. Thanks a lot.
Are you interested in knowing if you embody the essence of the lover in his fullness? Or if you are influenced by its more shadowy aspects? Why not take the masculine archetypes test? It's absolutely free and can guide you on a path of self-exploration. By gaining a deeper understanding of your masculine energies, you'll uncover your strengths and identify areas where you can grow. Don't miss out on this opportunity to embark on a journey of self-discovery. Take the masculine test today at